Simon is the moderator of New South Wales ACT Uniting Church in Australia and a member of the New South Wales Ecumenical Council, which helped to set up the Interfaith Domestic and Family Violence Declaration, signed by those 70 faith leaders and the New South Wales State Government ministers. I'll put a link to an article that our webmaster put up on Religions for Peace Australia. And Simon, please tell us how you did such a wonderful thing.
Well, I think the first thing would be just thank you, Terry, for inviting me, and thank you for having me. And I thank Oliver and Jasper too for their words of leadership. And I'm very conscious that there were three blokes presenting today, so that's one of the challenges for us. I want to be really clear that I was a participant in the process and certainly sought to contribute, but the leadership came from a number of faith leaders as well as from the Parliament. And that was a significant event for us, I think, in terms of calling the whole thing together. And I don't want to be cynical, but in a way, I think it's been a sweet spot for us in terms of a number of faith leaders, both from the mainstream Christian churches, but also from a lot of faith leaders across the community that came together in this space. And it was certainly a conversation that had some effort put in, and I think what helped us most was to have a draft proposal presented rather than just simply starting from a blank piece of paper, and that was certainly part of the conversation. One of the challenges for a lot of the faith communities, and I want to say faith as well as cultural communities, is how we understand the role and the voice and the place of women in the conversation. And certainly in churches like my own, for example, we would see women as equal in leadership and ordination and role in every way. So we had different conversations to those traditions that might necessarily see women held in a different role, a different place. And so part of that conversation is quite challenging too. So what happened for us was in being brought together, and of course most of it was like this one was on Zoom, so we weren't in the same room together. The suggested document, which I'll put the final document up on the screen if I possibly can. I think that's it there. Is that, can you see that? That's yes. The document, that's the Statement of Faith and Family Violence Declaration. So what happened was, what part of the conversation for us in this issue was that a number of us argued that we are not simply seeking to make a statement, but we wanted to make a statement in two places in particular. One is looking to the context in which we live and worship. So we wanted to speak to our own faith communities in making the statement, but also we wanted to speak to the wider community. And originally, a number of us felt that the statement that we were making was fairly anodyne, fairly simplistic in its form, that it didn't actually articulate what the community needed us to say. So for example, the document did say we think domestic violence is bad and shouldn't happen, but it didn't actually seek in any way to own the fact that our communities of faith are also engaged and have some problems in themselves. And that and so we added that line there that's in there that says, we acknowledge that communities have not always been a safe place for victim survivors and their families. We wanted originally to say we acknowledge that our communities and our faith communities, but that got changed in the conversation. Because what we found, and Oliver, I think, and Jasper have certainly made this clear today, that some communities, some faith communities are further along the conversation than others are, and that the wider community in many ways, through experience and through expertise, a lot further along the way in this conversation by necessity than a lot of faith communities have been. Because often this conversation is a difficult, well, not often, it's always a difficult conversation, but some communities, some faith communities have not really engaged in the conversation in ways that are helpful or constructive. And so having this conversation amongst many of the faith leaders was in fact a really good thing. I think not just for the effect of producing the document, but also in the effect of actually having an open conversation amongst each other. Once again, like today's presentation with a mostly male presenting group, there were a lot of male leaders speaking into the space, but there were some significant female leaders, and that was really helpful for us as well, especially in the wider faith community. But and that voice is really critical in this conversation. That the last thing we want to do is just simply have male leaders' voices being heard and not female leaders' voices being heard. And I was very conscious myself that before I was part of the conversation that I paid attention to my colleagues, female colleagues in this space, and asked them what their thoughts were about this, and certainly showed them the draft document and what they felt was important. As you can see from the statement itself, it's a fairly simple statement. It's not long, and it doesn't have a whole lot of contention about it, because the difficulty about working with any large group interfaith community or any large group is that there's going to be some challenge about how it's communicated. What I think was important too was the significant willingness of a whole range of faith communities to come together on this, but also the leadership in the political space. And I can't speak for Victoria and Tasmania, and would not seek to do so, but certainly politically in the space, the leadership of the minister, or both the ministers in this space, was a major contribution. So when the document was in fact launched and signed, it was held at Parliament House. And so it was seen to be more than simply a faith statement, a faith community statement. It was seen as being one that was about the whole community. So the response was, I think by and large, very well received. Do some people think more could be said? Yes, including myself. Do I realise that we are at many stages along this process? Yes. And for many faith communities, this was the first open conversation about this in the public space, where for others of us, like in the Uniting Church, I know in the Anglican and Catholic churches, for example, we have been having this conversation in ways in the community for some time. I don't want to speak for much longer, and I'm happy for the document to be there, and I think it's probably available as well, fairly simply and straightforwardly. But the agreement that we had in the launch of this is that this is not just simply something we're going to leave there and move away, but we are seeking to inform and shape our communities, both in an interfaith way and ecumenically, but also to progress our communities in that space as well.
How much lead-in, how much work did you need to do to get the faith leaders together?
Well, a bit of work, but I hate to speak about advantages of COVID, but one of the advantages of COVID was we already had a fairly strong network going in terms of the interfaith conversation. So in terms of working with multicultural communities, working with CAL communities, working with faith communities during the COVID crisis, that we actually already had a network that existed by and large. And that meant that there was already a series of relationships that existed ecumenically and interfaith-wise in the New South Wales community, and that helped, I think, start this conversation off. I'm not saying it was the only answer, but so when the multicultural, multi-faith conversation began, it was already, to use the expression, a warmed up space, I think. So that was already there. But certainly some leaders, especially in the political space, but certainly in the faith space, were engaged in energising it and driving it. And I think right at the beginning, a number of us were not cynical, but wary of where it might lead, where we might just get a simple what people expected to hear kind of statement, but we seem to, I think, achieve more than that.